children again. I feel like I can't say it enough. I think because I've missed out on saying it for so many weeks in a row, I feel like I say it a lot. So if you're tired of hearing me say good morning, tough. Seriously, I do hope you have had a good morning. I hope it's been worth the trip out of the house and coming in here this morning. I hope that being able to worship together has been worth it for you. I want to ask a very simple question. How many of you in your life have ever been stressed out? If you've been stressed out, just raise your hand. Okay, that's about the response I thought I would get. None of the kids really raised their hands, so that's good. Parents, that means you're doing a good job of keeping them from being stressed out and you're letting them play and be kids. So good job. I tend to spend quite a bit of my time stressed out. Most people would say, well, you don't look like it. It's because I've learned how to hide it very well. It actually, over the last few years, has manifested itself by my hair getting a little bit lighter. And my beard getting a little bit lighter in color. People used to tell me all the time, when you become a pastor, you're going to go gray. And I was like, nah, I'm good. My hair is jet black. I'll be good to go. And yeah, I should have had a before and after picture. That's why I have my wife. I should have told her I was going to do this ahead of time, and she could have made it happen. And you would have all been like, oh my gosh, look at the foreplanning he did for that. Yeah, but no, it didn't happen. But no, like people did, they told me, actually, even when I was in high school, and our high school chorus director, he had asked me the day I auditioned for the high school choir, the high school choral department, he said, so tell me, what are you going to do when you graduate high school? What are you going to do? Where do you see yourself going? I said, oh, I'm going to be a worship leader in a church. He said, okay. He said, he just kind of let it go. Well, then the next year, same thing. So so now you got a year of high school behind you. What are you going to be when you grow up? I said, no, I'm going to be a worship leader in a church. Okay. And it just kind of kept going. This was kind of the running theme. Well, then during my senior year of high school, he kind of realized, hey, this guy's going to be a worship leader in a church. And so at our high school, like the choral department did its like senior recognition and awards and all that kind of stuff towards the end of the school year. And he always pulled the seniors up and he always gave them a very special, unique gift. Every single one got something different. And some people would get a thing of heartburn medication because they had given him heartburn for years by just not doing what he was asked to do. Some of them he would give, like one year he gave somebody a set of track shoes, like track and field shoes, because they had been a track star all through high school and never backed off of it. And then he got to me. And my senior year of high school, and Mr. Hunt, if you're watching this, I love you so much. I cannot tell you how much of an impact you had in my life. But he was also a church music leader at one of the churches in town, and he had me come and do some things with their church. And he was much grayer than I was. And so I had noticed earlier in the week that he had a haircut. And I thought, what? It didn't seem like it was very long, but now, okay. So he got his hair cut, and we're sitting there, and so I'm standing there on the platform, and I had just gotten my letter jacket earlier in the year, so I'm standing there, and it's, towards the end of the school year, so it's like 985 degrees outside, and there I am with my high school letter jacket on, sweating to death. And he's like, so I have something for you. I know you swore up and down that you would never go gray as a result of working in the church world and working with people and dealing with their stresses. So I thought, since gray hair is a sign of wisdom as well, I would give you some of my wisdom. And he handed me a baggie full of his gray hair clippings to say, if yours doesn't turn gray, you can put this on your head instead. And I have, and honestly, I laughed about it. I thought it was silly. I thought it was I was kind of like, okay, whatever, And when you're young, you always think, I'm never going to get old. We had this conversation with Nevaeh was it last night? I think it was last night. We're talking, when you're 14, 15, 16 years old, you never think you're going to get old. You think life is just going to be, you're just going to sail through. Nothing bad is going to happen. Stresses are going to be minimal because, well, I'm young and I can handle it. And we looked at her and said, guess what? We thought the same things. We thought we would be able to just skate through life. It'll be great. We won't have to adult very much because we've got it together. And I thought, and I did. I used to think, you know what? Everybody in my family, like they've all had this really dark hair. And as I got older and I started looking at like some of the older men in my family and looking at them going, okay, I have two choices here. I'm either going to be completely bald by the time I'm 50, or I'm going to have unbelievably gray, silver hair by the time I'm 50. I think I know which one it's going to be. But we would go through it, and I would look at it, and they would say, well, the stresses of being an adult, the stresses of being a pastor, the stresses of being in church world, dealing with people in general are going to mess you up. And, and the more I've grown and the older I've gotten, I've realized and learned stress is inevitable. It's going to happen. As you get older and as you deal with life and you go through things, there's going to be stresses that are going to impact your life, whether it's financial stress, whether it's stress related to health issues that you didn't expect to come up, or even health issues maybe you did know you had, or whether it's the stress that comes from raising kids and hoping and praying that they will turn out okay, or maybe even the things that you just flat out don't even know are going to come. Maybe you're one of those people who you're always afraid of what's going to happen next because you don't know. The thing about stress is it has a very, very real physical reaction to us. It causes insomnia. It causes anxiety issues. I've talked to people before, they say, I feel anxious all the time. And I'm like, well, what are you stressed about? Well, I don't know what I'm stressed about because I don't know what's coming. I said, well, there's your stressor. You don't know, and you like to know. Whether it's insomnia, anxiety, a weakened immune system, digestive issues, whatever it is, our physical bodies deal with stress in different ways. And the way that we deal with that stress helps determine whether or not we're going to maintain a healthy lifestyle or whether we're going to get sucked further and further and further into a place where our health begins to suffer. And we suffer mentally and physically and emotionally. Now, all of us, if I was to take a poll in the room, if I said, okay, how many of you believe you need to limit the amount of stress you have in your life? We would all be like, yes, I want to go on vacation 4 days a week and only have to work 1 day a week, but still get paid for 5 days a week. That way I don't have to deal with the financial side of everything. Or you would say, yes, I believe I need to limit my stress and I need to only do this. We understand it, we know it, we recognize it, and we realize it, but that's our regular everyday life. We admit it, we need to limit it there, but then when it comes to our spiritual life, when it comes to our religious world, what do? We add stress. We add religious stressors to our world that end up doing the exact same thing to us, but why do we do it? If we know we need to limit physical stressors in our everyday life, then why do we add spiritual stressors? And the reason is this. We have been misled for centuries now to believe that the more religious we are, the better a Christian we are. And the reality is that's not true. There was a group of people, and I kind of introduced you to them last week, that were walking the earth, that were alive when Jesus was here. They were the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and they were a part of a group called the Sanhedrin. These guys were the religious leaders. Their whole purpose was to interpret the law for the everyday average people, because their entire their educational system worked towards taking the first 5 years of a kid's life once they started school to determine whether or not they had what it took to become a rabbi or a religious leader. And then from there, you could move into becoming part of one of these two groups. There were actually 4 groups that were part of this, but these were the 2 main ones that everybody knows. Their job was to interpret the law so that people knew how to live out the law. The problem was, as we saw last week, they became so mired in the law because the Pharisees believed that the oral traditions of the law had equal footing and equal power to the written laws that were found in the Torah, the first 5 books of our Old Testament. The Sadducees believed that only the written law had power. It didn't matter what anybody said because words could be misinterpreted. So you kind of see this situation like what you have in our Congress today, where you have Republicans, you have Democrats coming together to try to interpret what the law is supposed to look like and what it's supposed to mean for how we live our everyday life. And we all know how well that goes. We look at this and they become so mired in making sure that the law was what it was supposed to be, that they became something that Jesus took a hardline stance against. Jesus actually looked at them in one setting and said, whoa, woe to you. In other words, I feel sorry for you guys. I feel bad for you because you spend so much time washing the outside of the cup that you forget about the inside of the cup. But doesn't the same person that created the outside, didn't he create the inside as well? He said, you guys have missed the point. You have become so focused on making sure that you look good that you've missed out on what happens on the inside. And we started talking about it. Okay, well, okay, I get it. People do that today. And so we kind of looked at it from this perspective and said that same idea that was prevalent then has become prevalent and is still prevalent and will still be prevalent. And it has come into our everyday wordage as the word legalism. And we jumped into the dictionary last week to define it, and we defined it this way. Legalism can literally be defined as a strict, literal, or excessive conformity to the law or to a religious or moral code. Legalism is a strict, literal, or excessive adherence to the law or a religious or moral code. Thomas R. Schreiner from the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary made this statement. He said, legalism exists when people attempt to secure righteousness in God's sight. In other words, it exists when people try to make themselves right with God, okay with God, by good works. Legalists believe that they can earn or merit God's approval by performing the requirements of the law. All of us know somebody like this. And some of us, if we're honest, may actually be this. And we talked about the fact that, yes, we should adhere to the laws and the religious codes and moral codes because they're not bad. We actually saw where Jesus said, I've come to fulfill these laws. I've come to fulfill every single bit of the laws of the prophets. That is what I'm here for. The problem is that it weighs us down. Just like people in the Bible, we are worn out. We get worn out. We just don't want to admit it. We never want to admit the fact that by doing all these things, I'm exhausted. I have nothing left to give anybody or to do for anybody because I spend so much time focused on this. But I just don't know what to do. And we saw that Jesus actually gave us the answer in Matthew chapter 11 where he says, come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. And then he closed out that passage by saying, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. He said, what I'm asking of you is easy to do. See, Jesus came to change the way that we related to God. He came to refocus our attentions on what was on the inside of who we are and how we relate to God, and not just on the outside. Jesus came to show us how to actually lean into the spirit of the laws and how to live them in a way that relied on what the law really meant. His life, his death, every single bit of it paved a new way for humanity to interact with God and to be a part of a relationship with God. And we talked about this and we left it with this thought, this bottom line. We said legalism kills the death of Christ. Because when we bypass the fact that Jesus fulfilled all of the law and changed the requirements for us, then we wipe it away and it undermines it and it kills the death of Christ. Now, most of us think about it and we say, well, legalism only really exists in church settings. And to an extent it does. We see it play out in the clothes that we wear. Like when we walk in, I used to have conversations with people when I was in college. I would show up to church and I would be in a pair of khakis and a polo shirt. And I would get this thing that said, I would get these responses that said, whoa, you're in the Lord's house. You need to dress up more. And I said, well, now wait a minute. How does what I'm wearing influence whether or not I can worship God? It shows up even in the way that we talk, the wordage that we use, the verbiage that we use. When we use big words that people outside the church don't understand, it's taking and it's setting us up to say, well, now wait a minute now, okay, I don't understand that. I must not be part of your club. It shows up even in our beliefs about the law, whether I'm talking about the actual laws of the land or whether it's about the laws of God. When we become so focused on the laws of God and saying, well, this takes precedence over this, or this is worse than this, or this is better than this, it becomes a legalism thing. It even shows up in our beliefs about the Bible, as far as which translation is right, which translation is wrong. Should I read the Bible every day? Should I not read the Bible every day? Should I focus on the New Testament or the Old Testament? See what I'm saying? We become so mired in it that we miss what Jesus did. And so we end up becoming the very thing that Jesus took a stand against. We become the people that Jesus looks at and says, woe to you. You clean the outside of the cup, but you forget about the inside. Didn't the one who made the outside also make the inside? We become so caught up in it. And in fact, in Luke chapter 18, if you have your Bibles, go ahead and turn there. Matthew, Mark, and then Luke chapter 18. We're going to pick up partway down. If you have your phone or a tablet or something, or you're watching online, you can actually jump out to YouVersion on your YouVersion app, and you can actually follow along with the rest of the message from there. But Jesus, one of the things that I loved about Jesus is that Jesus talks in a way and teaches in such a way that you don't have to have a PhD in church literature and church history to be able to understand what he's saying most of the time. Some of it he spoke in hidden meanings because he only wanted a certain group of people to understand it at that time. But there were some things that he did that were completely in your face and made total sense right off the bat. And he explained himself. And he taught in what was called parables. And parables were stories that were rooted in today's world that had a meaning that was about another world. And anytime he taught, there was always a factor of people relating to God and what that looked like. So in this instance, he's sitting here in Luke chapter 18, starting in verse 9. He's telling a parable, okay? So he says, he also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and treated others with contempt. Now, he's sitting in this place. Now, he explains who's there watching and listening to the story because it helps us to understand why he told this particular parable. So he's sitting in a place where he's telling this story, and these people, they are the legalists. They are the ones who have said, I know the law, I'm going to live the law, and that's what I'm going to do, and that will make me right with God. And anybody else who doesn't do it is not worth my time. If you don't believe me, and you don't believe what Luke writes, let's keep going. So the story starts, he says, 2 men went up into the temple to pray, one a Pharisee, and the other a tax collector. Now, why in the world would he pick these 2 groups of people, okay? Well, one, he's been on a tear with the religious leaders, pointing out that their hearts have not been in the right place, okay? That makes sense. Why a tax collector? Because tax collectors were hated by the Jews. Now, this particular tax collector would have been a Jewish tax collector. We'll understand that a little bit more as we get a little bit further in. But understand this. Anytime that you see a tax collector mentioned in the New Testament, this is a Jew who has now become an employee of the Roman government gathering taxes for Caesar. What they would do is Caesar would say, now, we only want this much in taxes, but you can add anything above that you want to line your own pockets with. That's why it was such a big deal when Zacchaeus came out and said, if I've taken anything from anybody, I'm going to repay it, and I'm going to repay it above what I took. That's how he was able to do it, because if Rome said we want 10%, he would add another 10% or another 12% and take that into his own pocket. That's how he was able to pay so much back. They were seen as traitors because nobody wanted Rome in Jerusalem anyway, or in the outlying areas. So we see this situation, it starts to unfold. So you've got a Pharisee and a tax collector. And Jesus starts off with the Pharisee. He says, the Pharisee, standing by himself, prayed thus, God, I thank you that I am not like other men. He starts off by saying the exact same thing that Jesus said. He's saying this parable to people who are seeing their own righteousness and looking at others with contempt. The Pharisee starts off saying, God, thank you so much that I'm not like these other people. Thank you so much that I am not like them. And then he goes all the way into exactly what he's talking about. Thank you that I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers. And then he goes it a step further and says, or like this tax collector. He calls him out by name. Why am I not like them? Because I fast twice a week and I give tithes of all that I get. He points out how good he thinks he is. He does all the right things. He says all the right things. He follows the letter of the law. And then Jesus goes on, but the tax collector, standing far off, wouldn't even lift up his eyes to heaven. But he beat his breast, beating on his chest. God, be merciful on me, a sinner. Have mercy on me. Be merciful to me. And Jesus says, I tell you, this man, talking about the tax collector, went down to his house justified rather than the other. Now, wait a minute. that doesn't make sense, because the Pharisee was the one that he was doing all the right things, and he was living a life separate from these other people and these other things. But the tax collector, he's the one that was justified. Yes. He's the one that walked away with a relationship being mended with God. Why? Because anyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbles himself will be exalted. Well, now wait a minute. Okay, let's understand what's going on here. Okay, Jesus tells a story that challenges everything that the people who were standing around knew about how God works. He challenges every single bit of it. You have one man who saw himself as superior, and one man who saw himself for who he was. One was a legalist, the other was a realist. This was an admission of the heart of people. God knew, even in that moment, and even in today's culture and society, that people have superiority complexes. It doesn't matter if you are pink, purple, white, black, green, polka-dotted paisley with yellow stripes. Human beings have superiority complexes. We look at the people around us and we say, oh man, I'm glad I'm not in that situation. Man, I would never, I can't believe it. I would never be there. I never knew it. In the church, we see it as, I'm a Christian. I'm better. I read through the entire Bible this year. They didn't. I'm better. I sing nothing but Christian music. I'm better because they listen to Led Zeppelin. I don't watch that. They watch that. I'm better. No. God says that's not the case. See, Jesus knew that the Jews saw themselves as better than the Gentiles and the Samaritans. This really didn't have anything to do with the Pharisees. This had to do with human beings. So who were the Gentiles? Well, the Gentiles were anyone who wasn't a Jew. The Samaritans were people who were basically half-breeds. They were half Jewish, half other races. And they were seen as less than desirable because they weren't Jews. And so Jesus looks in their heart and he said, okay, I want you to understand, the people that you think are right with God are not always the ones who are the most right with God. Because a lot of times the ones who we see as not okay with God are the ones who have humbled themselves and acknowledged the fact that they have a problem, versus standing in front of us and saying, I have it all together, look at me. He knew that this was a debate that would go on and on and on and on. Jesus challenged the belief that God was only there for the Jews. Things like the parable of the Good Samaritan, he would say, okay, so who do you think this person's neighbor was? This man's laying beaten on the side of the road, and a rabbi walks by, a Jew walks by, and then a Samaritan comes along and takes him to get the help he needs. And it's the Samaritan. And then we see even where the Gerasene demoniac was healed and delivered. We see the Roman centurion who asked Jesus, just heal my kid. And it happens. We see the feeding of the 4,000. Notice I didn't say the 5,000. Most people don't realize there were actually two different situations where Jesus fed multitudes. The one that gets the most press is the 5,000 because it's a bigger number. But here's the crazy thing about the 4,000. At the end of that story, it says that the people praised the God of Israel. What's so interesting about that wording is the fact that why would the people of Israel turn around and say, as a result, they praised the God of Israel? This was most likely not 4,000 Jews. This was 4,000 Gentiles. This was 4,000 people who lived in an area where this took place that was most likely called the Decapolis, which was a Gentile area made up of 10 different cities that were housed and lived in by the Gentiles. And then we also see where Jesus heals a Canaanite woman's daughter. These were all situations where Jesus did the things that were out of the norm. He extended the hand of God to people other than Jews. And it blew people's mind. And here's the reason why. Jesus understood something that the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and even the Jewish people missed. And it's the fact that it's not just Gentiles It's not just Samaritans. It's not just purple people. It's not just plaid people who have sinned. All have sinned. Romans 3:23 says, "For all sinned and fall short of the glory of God." The original word there for the word all is the word pas, which literally translates to every kind, the whole. In this passage, in the context that it's at, Paul is teaching, and he's explaining that the Jews are not any better than anybody else because they had an understanding of who God was before Jesus came. He says it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter where they're from. Every kind of person sins. All people sin. The gift that God gave is for everybody. You are all on equal footing. See, we're called to see life differently. In John 13:34, Jesus says, listen, as I have loved you, I want you to love one another. The word "as" that he used there is the Greek word kathos, which means according to the same manner. In the same manner that I loved you, I want you to love other people. In the same ways that I treated you, I want you to treat other people. In the same ways that I spoke to you when I didn't have to, I want you to speak to other people. So what does this have to do with legalism? Well, when we allow ourselves to sink into the same place that the Pharisees and the Sadducees and even the Jewish nation had gotten themselves into, we miss something. We stop seeing the people around us as people that Jesus died for. It's easy sometimes to let ourselves slip into this place where we go, well, man, Jesus died for me. And the people that come through the doors of our church, we'll say, man, Jesus died for you. Jesus came and died for you, and then it stops. And that's where our focus ends up. And if we're not careful, we walk away and turn our eyes away and forget the fact that every single person, every person on the face of this planet is someone Jesus died for. The Gentile, the Samaritan, the Gerasene, the person that lives in the poor part of town, the person that lives in the rich part of town, the person who bagged your groceries, the person that was holding up a sign that said, we'll work for food. They are all someone that Jesus died for. But it's easy for us to turn a blind eye because without even meaning to, we begin to see ourselves as better than them. Because Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. Little ones to him belong. They are weak, but he is strong. But we miss the rest. We miss the fact that it doesn't matter whether they're red, yellow, black, white, green, purple, plaid, paisley with yellow polka dots. He loves them all. See, when we start to understand that, everything else melts away. Because we quit holding people to standards that we don't even meet. That was one of the issues that Jesus had with the Sadducees. He would say, whoa, woe to you, because you put burdens on people that you don't even touch with your little finger. Legalism makes us see superiority, and it breeds hubris. It breeds arrogance. It breeds conceitedness. And it breeds a much higher image of ourselves than we ought to have. Legalism, just like it kills the death of Christ, legalism kills humility. Because the better you get at something, what do? you puff up. The better you get at keeping the laws, the better you get at doing all the right things. And the further apart those moments come where you slip and fall, your humility begins to die. And you start to puff up if you don't keep your eyes focused in the right place. See, every single one of us walks through life with chains wrapped around our hands and our feet from the moment we're born. We are captives to the sin that we live in. And it's only by the grace of God and only through the sacrifice of Jesus that those chains are broken. It's impossible for us to break those chains. So let me ask you this. If we can't break those chains, why in the world would we allow ourselves to pick them back up and wrap them back around our arms and our feet? It doesn't make sense. The better we get at doing the things, the easier it is for us to begin to believe that we have what it takes, and we lose our humility. Legalism kills the death of Christ because it makes it about us. And when that happens, we allow legalism to also kill our humility. It's only by the amazing grace of God himself that we are able to actually see him for who he is. So what does that have to do with you? Well, I want to ask you to do one simple thing. Stop. I'm not asking you to stop being a legalist or anything like that. I'm just asking you to just stop and then take a good hard look in the mirror. Because all of us, if we're really honest about it, are legalistic about something. It's true. Based on the definition of legalism, all of us are legalistic about at least one thing when it comes to our faith. The question is, what is it? And if Jesus came to break that chain and fulfill all the laws so that we could place our faith and our trust in him, and then he took it and said, okay, all of these laws, I'm going to shrink them down to this. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, and your soul, and love others as yourself. And then he took it and said, I'm going to shrink it down even more. In the same ways that I loved you, people will know that you are my followers by the way that you love others. What is it that you need to step away from and quit leaning into so heavily and replace it with him? What is it? I can't answer that question for you. Only you can. All I know for sure is Jesus really did not like the legalists because they missed the point of who he was and why he was here. He loved them, just didn't care for them too much. He came to kill legalism. The problem is, if we're not careful, we will breathe life into it and kill his sacrifice. Father, thank you so much that you are more than we realize. Thank you that you want more for us than to just do the things for no reason other than to try to be okay with you. You've already made it possible for us to be okay with you. Father, I pray that you would, over the course of the next few minutes, next few hours and days and weeks and months and years, that you would continually remind us that we are on the same playing field as everybody else. The only difference is that for us, we know who you are. I pray that you would help us to maintain our humility, and that you would help us to see every person that we come in contact with as someone that you died for. Help us to remember that because of your amazing grace, that our chains are gone. And that we are bathed in an unending, never-ending, everlasting love that we will never really fully be able to comprehend. Father, help us to never forget that, so that we can love others in the same manner that you love us. In Jesus' name, amen.